Good morning to all of you. I am sorry to tell you that the person who was going to be our speaker this morning is not with us. And she was so looking forward to it. I'll just tell you a little bit about her. She is Carly Smith. She is a student at UNF. She was recommended to us by her professors in the Environmental Education and Research Program. And she works with the city of Jacksonville. I'm going to show you one of the things she's doing on a slide here in a little bit. But she called in during the service, and I knew that it was her. And she was coughing her head off. And, you know, it's either a pretty good act or she's not feeling too well. And I'm choosing to believe it's the latter. So we have a great program for you anyway, thanks in very large part to Nancy. So there are two things that I wanted us to think about today. The first one is I'd like us to start with a prayer. There is a piece of it, it's on your table. And if you need copies, be glad to give you another one. But this prayer is from Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which is one of the things we're going to talk about this morning. So if you'll pray with me together. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for good at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. That prayer is a very good summary, if you will, of what Laudato Si is about. This Laudato Si is actually available for free online if you would like to read it that way. I have this copy, which I don't need, but it's good to have copies. Although my wife would say, no, you should have just read it online, but that's okay. So Laudato Si basically is called or is referred to often as Pope Francis's climate change or climate issue encyclical. An encyclical is just a teaching from the Pope in a particularly succinct and complete form. This was his first encyclical. Actually, Paul and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. So it's really his first encyclical. It was published in 2015, very soon after he became Pope. And I think it's probably good. It's nice to be talking about it, especially given that he's now passed away. And it's also interesting because there are references in Laudato Si and in a lot of commentary on this encyclical about Pope Leo XIII, encyclical, and my Latin is not so good, but Rerum Novarum, which was generally considered the first social justice encyclical from a Catholic pope, or from a pope, and that was back in 1891. And a lot of Catholic teaching, social teaching, since then has come from, or has kind of referred back to Rerum Novarum, and it talks about a number of things. But Pope Francis is talking more about relationships than he is about the climate. And basically he puts, our relationship to our common home. Nancy, yeah, there we go. So the encyclical is called Laudato Si, and then it goes on care for our common home. Well, that's our common home. I mean, this is a picture from the moon it's not one that you may normally have seen. But this is taken right around 2015, around the time that Pope Francis was writing. There are lots of pictures from space, and if you look, if you just look for pictures of Earth from space on Google or whatever your search engine is, you can find beautiful pictures like this of our blue Earth, and you can find it from as a very, very small, pale blue dot. As you get farther and farther away. But this is our common home. This is, as you know, this is where we live. This is it. And so the Pope encourages us to care for our common home and to recognize that this is God's creation, and to recognize that all of life and all of Earth is our common home, and that when we live in right relationship with all of our home, with all of God's creatures, then that's what we're called to do. Pope Francis has some things to say about the way that we live, in a way that, as he characterizes it, and you may or may not agree with this, but that we don't care for our common home because we are looking either to exploit it, to treat it as just something that we are to have dominion over and can therefore do whatever we want. But you'll remember that Sarah Flint, if you were here last week, Sarah Flint made a reference to the passage in Genesis that says, well, God gave dominion to the earth, as not being something that means that we can just exploit and do whatever the hell we want with it, but rather it should be treated as this is a stewardship obligation that you have. It's a stewardship relationship that you have. And when we live on the earth and are called to be in dominion over the earth, that we are called to be stewards of the earth as representatives of God. And so there's that. So just a quick kind of overview of the encyclical. Okay, thank you, Nancy. So one of the key themes is that we are one human family. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers, according to Pope Francis. And again, that may be something that you would say, well, I don't know about that, but that's the suggestion that Pope Francis makes. And he says, loving our neighbor has global dimensions in a shrinking world. At the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. And so, again, the gospel, and this is, Jesus calls us to be peacemakers in the Sermon on the Mount. And to be in the Sermon on the Mount, God, or Jesus suggests that blessed are those who are peacemakers. And that's what this call is for. Nancy, you might want to go to the next one. And so this is just kind of a little nice little graphic. But the themes for this encyclical are that we need to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, and that those two relationships are absolutely interrelated, and that if we think that we are going to be able to care for the earth without also living in a way that is just and caring for the poor, then we are mistaken, and that we will not be able to carry that off. And then you want to go to the next one. And so, we'll get to this in just a second. So just a few things. The encyclical is, and if you'll bear with me for just a second, it's divided into 6 chapters. The first chapter is called "What is Happening to Our Common Home?" And that looks at various symptoms of environmental degradation. If you're looking for charts and graphs and tables and stuff to show what's going on with the earth, this is not the place to look for that. That's not in here. Rather, Pope Francis will give you some references, but he assumes and asserts that, in fact, there are environmental issues that the earth faces. And so when he talks about those in terms of the depletion of fresh water, the loss of biodiversity, all of those kinds of things. But he doesn't spend a lot of time on that because he says, it's just self-evident, and that's not really what I'm talking about a lot. Rather, what he spends his time on is recognizing that we're interconnected and that our relationships need to be put in right order if we have any chance of moving along. And he says, a truly ecological approach is inherently social, an approach that simultaneously hears the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So we can talk about that. And we've looked at that to at least some extent over other sessions in this series. The second chapter is called The Gospel of Creation. And he considers the world the way that God intended it. And he draws his references from Scripture and from the way that the world just is the way that we experience it. And if there's one thing that I would like, that seems obvious to me, is that this issue of how we deal with the world, how we deal with all the creatures in the world, is a scriptural moral issue. It is not just a political issue. It's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's not an American, Native American. It's not any of that. It's a clearly spiritual issue. The third chapter is the human roots of the ecological crisis, and he basically talks about 2 basic points there. And one of them is, and he's gotten a lot of criticism, as you can imagine, he's gotten a lot of criticism for a lot of things. And one of the things that he's gotten criticism for is asserting that humans have a lot to do with the environmental crisis, as he would put it. He uses the term Anthropocene, as a marker for, the time period that we're living in, and that. He also talks about technology. One of the things that he says is, you might get the impression that I would like us to go back to the Stone Age, and that is not the case at all. In fact, I remember, and Linda, and several of you may know this, but one of the things when we looked at the Episcopal Church's curriculum on, what would we need to do in order to move back to, rather than go to the Stone Age. The assertion in the Episcopal program is, well, if we lived kind of like people in 1955 in Switzerland lived, well, that would be kind of what we need to do. That's all we need to do. You can still drive your car. You can still have electricity. You can still do all of those kind of things. I don't think they had the internet then, but anyway, that's a different point. But anyway. So, but the basic point is that we don't really have to go back that far in order to adopt a lifestyle that would be worth it. The other thing that he talks about in terms of technology is that for many of us, we have the notion that, well, humans are very smart, which we are, and that we will be able to figure out something, to take care of, all of this problem. And Pope Francis says, the idea that we're going to constantly make progress is probably not a good thing to rely on when it comes to this. So those are the two basic points that he makes in his third chapter. In the fourth chapter, he talks about how everything is interconnected. In the fifth chapter, he talks about various ways that we could approach it. He talks about the failures of political leaders, but then he talks about the failures of individuals as well. So it's not only our government or anybody's government that needs to deal with this, although that's an important thing. He calls the church to be responsible as well, and he calls for each one of us to take some action. And the two actions that he actually asks us to do is, one, that we need to talk with each other about this. And we're going to see a video in just a second, because you don't have Carly Smith. She'd be much more interesting. But this is a video from Catherine Hayhoe that I think you're going to enjoy. Many of you have already seen it, but if you have, it's a good thing to look at anyway. And Catherine Hayhoe basically she is a scientist who actually grew up just like I did as a Southern Baptist. And she says, you probably wouldn't think that me as a Southern Baptist are going to be a climate advocate, but I am. And she says, the reason why is because we all have this in common. We need to find ways to talk to each other. We need to recognize that God does not leave us without hope. And we need to figure out how we can move together, to deal with the issues that we have in our climate. But Pope Francis adds to that, he says, anytime you have discussions about climate, all of the perspectives, or as many perspectives as you can have, you need to have represented. And so I remember that he called together a group. It was a fairly small group to talk about Laudato Si, and the people that were invited were a representative, I forget, so some governmental representatives and so forth. But there was also a young person, not Greta Thunberg, but anyway, somebody who was young and who represents the future, that we're getting into. Also, there was someone from, I believe it was someone from Africa, just from Africa, because they have a different perspective, or he figured they would have a different perspective. And he also invited a couple of scientists to speak for the oceans and the forests. I mean, so if we're going to talk about this, it's not an American issue, it's a all of us issue, in other words. So that's how she basically looks at this. But then the second thing, and so she would encourage any conversations to be as broad and with as many perspectives as possible. And the second thing, and the last thing that he suggests is that before every meal, we simply offer grace. We pray to God for thanks, giving our thanks, because apparently that's not something that a lot of people do anymore. And so he says, if we just do that, that would at least, that would be a good thing to be doing. So all of these are connected points on how we can move forward, and the things that need to happen together. So if Carly were here, she, like I say, she's a student at UNF. She probably wore herself out because they just had exams, and so, that's kind of, you may look back on going to college and taking your exams and everything. I don't want to do that again. But she is also employed by the City of Jacksonville's Office of Sustainable Initiatives, which is part of the Resiliency Department. And so you may not know, you may know very well, but that department, the City of Jacksonville, has a publication, and Nancy and I decided not to flip it because it's 294 pages. But that Resilient Jacksonville was put out starting in 2023, and Carly has been working on that. So we're going to try to get her back and see if she can, come and tell us a little bit more about that. But if you are interested in what's going on in Jacksonville to promote resiliency, this is at least the City of Jacksonville's take on that. And this one is updated in October of last year. So the plan is to continue to do this. And I think this is going to cover a lot of issues that, may be of interest to us.